Hello everyone, it's 2024 and the Oh Yum live streams are back. I thank you for joining me, and we are kicking off this year's live streams with some comfort baking. You've probably noticed the recipe right below. That's something we always like to include with Oh Yum. We don't want to keep you guessing through the recipe. You can find the full recipe right below the window here. Welcome, and today's recipe, I want to get right to it, the chewiest oatmeal cookies. Now, not chewiest as in chewy, soft, and soggy, crispy right around the edges, but super soft and chewy. They've got that pull to them in the center, full flavor. And you know how, if you've joined my live streams before, first, I have to say hello to everyone. So Bonnie, you know you're getting a batch of these cookies down the street. Mom, I know you'll be watching later, and so will Kathy. I see lots of familiar names coming up on the chat thread. Queenie, hello, Maria. Everyone is joining me from around the world because we all like cookies. Now, what I'm doing differently with this chewiest oatmeal cookie recipe is actually, oh, I can't forget to say hello to Esme and Lori, if you're watching. I'm actually showing you the finished product. If you want to switch to the overhead, Michael, you know how I'll make the cookies, and then because we're doing this live, we don't want to sit around for X minutes while they bake. I baked half a batch earlier so you could see them. They are cooled, but I'm putting the other half of the batch in the oven right now. I'll set the timer so you will see real life how these cookies come out of the oven, and then I get to have warm, chewy oatmeal cookies. So I'm gonna pop these in now. If you're baking along with me, you wanna preheat your oven to 375 Fahrenheit. That's 190 Celsius. And I'm going to set the timer for 8 minutes. And that's a key to oatmeal cookies. When they come out of the oven, they look like they're slightly undercooked, but they will continue to set. Those oats absorb all that liquid. That's part of the good chewiness in an oatmeal cookie. So don't be tempted to overcook them, even if they look a little bit underdone coming out of the oven. Making oatmeal cookies is very similar to making chocolate chip cookies. You can think about making them, and then all of a sudden 10 minutes later, they're coming out of the oven. And they're easy to make by hand. I've already softened my butter, so 10 tablespoons. That's the same as 150 grams. I'm seeing notes from all over the world here. This is amazing. Now I'm gonna soften my butter, and you know, if you've watched my videos before, that I like to bake using unsalted butter, because the simple reason is that way I'm in charge of the salt. Recipe for recipe, depending on the sweetness, you want to be able to add more salt. If you have a salted butter that you like using and you know it works repeatedly for your recipes, then of course you should stick with it. But I favor, because I do so much baking, I favor using unsalted butter. I am going to add now my brown sugar, and you'll see in the recipe I've asked for dark brown sugar or demerara sugar. This is demerara, and you can see it's a lot softer and wetter than a light brown sugar, and it's that little bit of extra moisture that I want to add to this recipe to make these cookies the chewiest. Hello from Ontario and Jordan and USA and Brampton and Argentina and Mexico. I see you all watching. Thank you for saying hello in the thread. If you have any baking questions, do let me know. Now, if you've seen my chocolate chip cookie recipe, and I know a lot of you have, you know I add cornstarch to help keep the cookie nice and soft. I add to my oatmeal cookie recipe, and I do add the cornstarch, but when I'm beating in the sugar, I add a tablespoon of honey, or you can use fancy molasses. And that is simply sugar in a liquid form, and that really does help contribute to the chewiness in the center of these oatmeal cookies. So now I'll just take a second and blend this in by hand until it's all looks alike. In this creaming method, this beating of the butter and sugar together, helps build structure and stability in the cookies because I'm adding actually a whole lot of oats. I like really oaty oatmeal cookies, but when you have less flour, the cookies can fall apart. So this step of, without being so technical, smushing the butter and brown sugar together really builds that structure. And you'll see the brown sugar almost takes on a lighter color. And I see that darker bit is actually my honey. So I want to make sure that gets smoothed into the mixture too. Oh, Maria, great question. Can you use golden treacle? Yes, 100%. It's just that, and it's okay if you don't even measure the tablespoon. If it's a little more or less than 15 mil, a tablespoon in there, you're going to be absolutely fine. That's what's giving that that sort of stickiness in the center. And Emily, you're asking, why aren't your cookies spreading? That could be a couple of things. You want to make sure your butter's soft. If it's a recipe that's baked where the cookie doesn't chill before it's baked, you want to make sure your butter is nice and soft. Make sure you are adding the right amount of sugar. And when it comes time to add the flour, don't overmix it too much. This cookie recipe, because I add so many oats and it gives the batter a lot of body, I actually press down the cookies a little bit before I put them in the oven. So maybe that would help your cookie baking and promote spread. The other reason, check your oven. Make sure your oven's at the right temperature. Marie's asking a good question. While I add my single egg and teaspoon of vanilla, I'm gonna answer Maria's question about why do some recipes call for a combination of white or brown sugar. Like my chocolate chip cookies, I use both. And the reason is for that combination of the batter color. Maybe I don't want it to be as dark as, say, this oatmeal cookie. And then the brown sugar is there for some moisture and additionally a bit of a caramel flavor. So I hope that answers your question. And you'll find some cake recipes or loaf cakes, like a banana bread, calls for a combination of white and brown sugar for that very same reason. Oh, and Lisa, you applied for the Great British Bake Off. Oh, I know if you made it, you're not allowed to talk about it. They make you sign such serious contracts, but my fingers are crossed for you, Lisa. I'm glad you found the strength and confidence to do it, and I wish you the best of luck. And just enjoy the process. Just enjoy every minute of it. Okay, so now I've got everything combined. The egg and the vanilla have been added, and you can see this is nice and smooth. Now, have you ever made a batter before, and you find at this point when you add the egg, the batter starts looking a little bit curdled? If you find that is starting to happen, in order to keep your batter holding together, take a bit of your flour from your measured flour and add a little sprinkle of it. Not too much, just a tablespoon or two. And that can help smooth out your batter before you add all your other ingredients at once. Oh, Peter's asking a question about gluten-free flour. Do you need to add more liquid? This is for gluten-free flour bread. Do you need to add more liquid? It's a tough question because gluten-free flour pre-blended mixes tend to vary. So you'll have to fiddle with your recipe a bit. I do find that the gluten-free baking blends work best with recipes with a lot of moisture. So my instinct is to tell you, yes, if it's a drier style of recipe like this, you could add just not a lot, but a tablespoon or two, like a little more honey would add some moisture and liquid. I would avoid water, but something like apple juice, something with a little flavor, will allow, because the gluten-free blends, especially if they've got a rice or a bean flour base, that ground bean or rice has to absorb some moisture to grow and fill its space. Does that help? I hope that helps explain that a little bit for you, Peter. I'm gonna set this aside for a second, take a peek at, I did not set the timer. I thought I set the timer on my cookies. I'm just gonna take a peek. They're coming along. I'm gonna put the timer on for 2 minutes. How long have I been talking? About
6:10.
Okay. All right, I've got 2 minutes set, so then it'll be time to go back to those cookies. For an oatmeal cookie, a simple cookie, if you've watched my banana bread live stream, and I highly recommend it if you want a really good banana bread recipe, it is my go-to banana bread. Do you always sift your ingredients? If I'm making a cake, yes, 100%. But cookies, no, you want to get them in the oven pretty quickly. But you do want to combine those dry ingredients together. So I've got my flour measured, and yes, you can even do this on top of your cookie batter loosely. So if you measure your flour right into your mixing bowl, then stir everything. That's what I'll just do, just to show you what I mean. You know what I mean. So I've got the wet ingredients, so I'm adding my flour right now on top. But before I stir that in, I'll add my 1 tablespoon of cornstarch. That's that secret, like my chocolate chip cookies. For this, the reason cornstarch works is it's hygroscopic. It pulls moisture to itself and holds it. And that's what keeps the center of the cookie soft when you add that little bit of cornstarch. To back it up, I came up with that, I figured that out when I was making pavlova. And the only difference between a crispy meringue and a soft-centered meringue is the addition of the cornstarch. And so that's how I figured it out. I've got a combination, just half a teaspoon of baking powder and baking soda. Whoop, most of that went into the bowl. Let me get a little more of it in there. And because I use the unsalted butter, half a teaspoon of salt, and then I like to add half a teaspoon of cinnamon, or if you like pumpkin pie spice, you can add that as well. And so now I'm just gonna take a fork and just blend those together. Okay, that's the timer for the cookies. So we're going to take a quick pause so I can show you these cookies coming out of the oven, because this is key too. I wanted to show you this. When they come out, and they spread, but not too much, you want to give the tray a good smack, hot from the oven, and that will collapse the cookies, so then the center kind of condenses, becomes thick, and that's the next secret, kind of the final secret behind those chewiest oatmeal cookies. So let's set these aside to cool, and back to this batter. So I just stirred with a fork, and if you're just joining me now, I'm making the chewiest oatmeal cookies with that little bit of cinnamon or pumpkin spice blend if you want. And yes, bake it simple. Imagine these cookies with brown butter. And if you wanted to do that, you certainly could. You would melt the butter, brown it in a pan. You want to let it cool completely before you start mixing in your other ingredients. And test, this actually brings up a good point, because I know you're all keen bakers and you might want to try this, is test a cookie, because I find sometimes a batter made with melted butter, you need to either let it rest for at least an hour or chill it in the fridge before you scoop and bake it to kind of reset the butter. Otherwise, you could end up with cookies that are a bit too flat. Oh, Cherry, there you are. Hi, I'm so glad you could join us. I know you're up early this morning watching from the Philippines. Okay, now that I've stirred in the finely ground dry ingredients, the flour, the baking powder, and spices, now I can add the oats. There we go. And I like to use regular rolled oats as opposed to quick cook or instant, because those in the process where the oat grain is steamed and then flattened. That's why oat grains look like this, and steel cut oats are steamed, not quite as long, and then cut across, which is why they have that coarse meal texture, but these are flattened. So instant oats are steamed longer and then flattened. So you only have to add a little bit of water and they don't need much time. Where quick cook are steamed a little less than the instant, and then regular is steamed to the point where they flatten. These retain a little more fiber, but they also retain their texture in baking, and that's why I favor regular rolled oats in most of my oat recipes. And this time of year, being winter, oh, Michael, what? We eat oatmeal at least twice a week. I love oats this time of year. Once you've got those oats worked in, oh, Cherry, good question. If I brown the butter, do I use more to offset the water that will evaporate? No. It doesn't, I find it doesn't make that much of a difference, but that's a very good question to ask. And Jen is asking a great altitude question. If you're watching from Calgary, you are at the point, Calgary, Alberta, you do need to make adjustments for altitude a little bit. I find cookies, because they have such a short cook time and such a dense batter, you need to adjust very little. If I would do anything, Jen, I would reduce your baking powder and baking soda a little bit, but nothing else should really have to change. It's cakes. Cakes and breads really take the most adjusting. So now for your add-ins. At this point, anything goes. If you want to add toffee bits, if you've got leftover candies from Christmas or Heaven's Halloween, you could add those. Raisins are a classic, pecans are a classic, even chocolate chips are a classic. I love chocolate with my oatmeal cookies. So that final last addition, 1 cup or 250 ml, you can add all dried fruits, all nuts, all chocolate, or I'm doing a 50-50 of chocolate chips and dried cranberry. So I like that sweet tart contrast. And now I'll stir this to coat. And it smells good because those cookies I baked off when we started this live stream are now just cooling right behind me and smell pretty delicious. Oh, now here's an interesting question. Is adding sourdough starter discard to your cookie dough? Yes, you can. It does take a slightly different formula to the cookie dough because what you have is a change of flavor, but you have a gluten development. That sourdough starter has a stretch to it that can affect the texture of your cookies. But I think it would work well, especially with an oat cookie, because the oats are naturally without gluten and they would interrupt that protein bonding. So I think you would have good luck there. So ultimately my answer is yes. Yes, you could. Oh, chopped dates and walnuts, Tessie. That's a great call. And hi, Rosie from Utah. So I've already baked off 2 trays, so I'm just gonna scoop 1 more and get it in the oven. These questions you're asking are fantastic. And Ahmad, hello, nice to see you there. And I see you used gula melaka in place of brown sugar in my chocolate cake recipe. That is a fantastic substitution. If you're not from Southeast Asia, gula melaka is the delicious coconut sugar, and it's got a beautiful natural brown color and a moisture to it, and such a delicious taste. It makes me want to go back because it has been some time since we've been to Malaysia, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
2016.
Oh, 2016 was the last time we were there. You're right. I'm using an ice cream scoop to portion the cookies. 2 spoons does the trick. But because I add so many oats to this recipe, I find it's not overly sticky and it's easy to handle if you're just even shaping the cookies with your hands. This is one of those great recipes. If you don't want to bake all your cookies now, what I like to do is I scoop them. In fact, that's what I'll make use of that now. First thing I'll do is lightly flatten. This is what I was talking about before to get cookies to start spreading a little faster. If it's a more dense cookie batter, just flatten them a little bit, not too much. You can put flour on your hand if you want, but this doesn't really stick. I might as well get these baking too, right, Michael? This time I will set the timer on 8. Okay, the timer is going. But what I like to do with the leftover batter, and I will do just that because I don't need so many cookies, is I just scoop them onto a plate very close together. You pop this in the fridge to chill the batter down fully. You don't even need to put them in the freezer in the dish like this. Just chill them in the fridge for an hour or so. Then you can pack them up in a container. They won't stick together, and then you pull them out as you need them, let them thaw on the counter to room temperature. These are so small that basically by the time you preheat your oven, these will have softened up, and you pop them in the oven and bake away. I'll keep doing that later. So let's go back to the cookies. Oh yeah, these, of course I'm going to show you the warm cookies, because that means I get to taste a warm cookie. So I do let them cool on the tray because they can be a bit fragile coming out of the oven. Like I said, you don't want to overcook your oatmeal cookies. And then, with the chocolate chip still melted. These questions that you're asking are fantastic. So if you don't mind, I'm going to keep answering some questions. I hope, I will eat a cookie. But yes, cherry, this would make a fantastic cheesecake crust. Be careful though if you add too many dried fruits, because it might gum up your food processor if you're pulverizing it. Could you add malt powder or malted milk powder to this recipe? Yes, yes you could. That would taste delicious, and add almost, it could replace the vanilla because it adds that sort of toasted grain sweetness to it that would be delicious. Wow, a recipe that calls for 3 cups of rolled oats. That is that AIF Miami? That's a big batch of cookies, or that is a lot of rolled oats? I'd be interested to know how the cookies baked. Did they flatten? St. Cheryl, you're asking about the scoop size. This is a 2 tablespoon by measure. No, it's a little more than that, just 2 1/4 tablespoon. But the recipe makes about 2 dozen. The bake time of 8 to 10 minutes. For this scoop size, I find 8 minutes is perfect. But if you're making your cookies a little bit bigger, because I do get about 4 extra when I use this small scoop size, that's where your bake time will be 10. So the size really determines it. And yes, Angela, you certainly could use a stand mixer to make this cookie dough. You'd have it done in 90 seconds, honestly. And yeah, I hear you about Spanish subtitles. I think that is a fabulous idea. And our fantastic channel manager, Rob, we can have that conversation again. It's just figuring out how to get it all done so we can get all the programming you want to you. Oh, Ahmad, I do have a sticky toffee putty recipe. If you actually look down in the channel feed, I just did one before the Christmas holidays and walked through it step by step. So please check out that recipe. I've got so many fantastic recipes. Marianne, this would adapt to vegan baking beautifully. I would use a flax egg. It only calls for the 1 egg. I would use a flax egg in its place. You could use coconut oil. I would melt half of it, leave half of it at room temperature, or you can use a vegan spread, and everything else, vegan chocolate, if you're adding chocolate, of course, would work perfectly. And we've got a question about using almond flour. Yes, I would use some almond flour, but I would actually add a little bit of tapioca starch or even a little extra cornstarch in place of that 1 cup or 150 gram measure of all-purpose flour. Faith is asking for low carb recipes. You are not the first person to ask that today, so I am going to make a note of that and give that consideration. Your questions are fantastic. Oh, Marianne, yes, you could use ghee. The difference is ghee is simply clarified butter, so you would need, it would work just fine. The amounts of liquid I don't think would compromise the recipe. It would make it a little richer of a cookie. And yes, Nicole, you could use applesauce instead of egg. I love these questions coming in. It's a simple oatmeal cookie, but we all want to make it, and we want to make it to suit our family and friends, of course. So I love seeing these questions come in. Maria's asking how long can you store the cookie dough in the freezer? I find unbaked doughs are optimal up to 3 months. Of course, they'll keep to a year, but I find anything sort of butter-based that has a mild flavor starts picking up freezer taste after a while. So optimal is 3 months. And Louise, you can find this recipe right below this window. Where you see read more, click on that. The full recipe in imperial and metric appears. So you can come back to this video, watch it again, bake along with me, and I will be back this time next Tuesday, 6 p.m. Eastern, with another Cozy Comfort Bake. Do you want to know what I'm going to be making? Should I give it away, Michael? I should give it away? Okay. I will be making my streusel-topped double blueberry muffins. I have worked on blueberry muffins. I've been making them for years. This is it. I've decided this is where I stop with blueberry muffins. So you have to come back and join me next week for another Cozy Comfort Bake on Anna Olson Live. It's been a pleasure. Your comments and questions, you know, so many people come back to this video and they're reading your questions and they're seeing the comments. And so it's my pleasure to be able to answer them. I'll see you in a week, everyone. In the meantime, enjoy baking your delicious, chewiest oatmeal cookies. Cheers, everyone.